I thought the minutes were really good. And I don't know if anyone else had comments on the minutes, but would someone make a motion to approve the minutes of May 16th? I see motion from Mike Yagman.
Motion
Is there
to
a second?
approve the minutes.
Yes, from
Second.
Bob Dare. So motion by Mike, second Bob. Any further discussion? If all in favor, say aye. The minutes of May 6th are approved. The next order of business is a couple of issues around this being kind of the year. One that we went over where I described who is the 14 people who are fully reappointed and reborn, the 4 that are reappointed but not sworn. Amy will remind them. And then I don't know if there are any that have not been reappointed, but that's the current status of membership. Meetings are open to the public, and for Kyle or Eden, anyone who wants to come, or I see Kim Botello has just joined us. All encouraged to participate, and we don't take a lot of vote, just discuss and get suggestions from everyone. But if you want to be a member and vote, then there's appointment process, and then you get sworn. I do want to kind of out of order. David Cole has offered his resignation, and David is the first chair of the Increment Subcommittee. He is 94 years old, and he's also been a member of the planning board, and he's been on a lot of other committees that serve. He's really been a treasure of town, and he contributed to the Climate Resilience Committee. We've been in existence now for about 3 years, and he helped get us off ground and provided very valuable service to us. And so I wanted Amy, as you minutes, to spread on the minutes. We are very grateful for his service. Understand with the amount of time spent and his age, his desire to lessen the amount of time he spent on town boards. But I know people here who have worked with him extensively, but ask someone for a motion to accept David's resignation. Jim, do you want to say anything about David?
Yes, yeah,
You're
I
on
would,
mute,
I would,
I think.
hold on.
You're okay.
I should not be
You're
on
okay.
mute.
We can
We
hear
can't
you.
anyway.
We can hear you.
So I would move.
You're
to
not on,
accept-
we can't hear you. What's,
I don't
John,
know.
John, I think you're the one that might have
Yeah.
audio
We-
problems.
Yeah, I can hear him.
Okay, so
can other people hear? Jim?
Yeah,
I
Just
can hear
me?
you.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
yes.
okay, I would move to regretfully accept David Cole's resignation I've worked with David for about 18 years on various things. David and I together started the nonprofit South Coast Climate Change Coalition several years ago, which is now not in operation, but he is going to be missed, and I reluctantly move to accept his resignation.
Maybe what we should do is thank him for his distinguished service to this committee and to other town committees.
Absolutely.
I second that with Michael's addition.
Hmm. Think need to call
John,
for a vote.
you need to call for a vote.
He's
I think John's-
he looks like he's
audience.
in the midst of fixing his laptop.
Oh, that's an idea.
We now have a quorum, I think, as well, because Joseph Inglesby joined us.
Right.
So I don't think Joseph is actually on the committee. Yeah, I don't think he was
Oh, okay.
appointed.
I think Joseph should be I think he's chairing the ag part. So he should be appointed to this committee. What do you say, Joseph?
All right, I can hear at any rate now.
Okay, so we had the motion and the second. We just need to call the vote.
All right, all those in favor of accepting David's resignation, say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay. Thank you very much, Jim, for that. Sorry for my glitch in hearing people. The next thing I'd like to, and I think we have a quorum now with Joseph here.
So Joseph was not been reappointed to the committee.
Oh, he's not even been reappointed. That's right.
So does Joseph want to be reappointed? I think we can arrange that.
Joseph,
unmute.
you're on mute. Joseph, you're on mute. You're still on mute.
Is, I'm sorry. That would be great. Thank you very much.
You need to get reappointed. So you want to,
All right. That's through the town clerk or the select board.
the select board has to reappoint you, and then once you're reappointed, you have to get sworn in.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. All right, so we will continue on. I want to say a couple of other things. To those who already are appointed, sworn in, and those who will be, once you're appointed and sworn in, we are town employees. And there are a couple of things I think Amy or Michael emailed us all ethics training with a link on how to do that through mass.gov. And it is something we have to do every 2 years. I did it. It took about an hour. It's an hour of your life you won't get back, but you only have to do it once every 2 years. So I encourage you to do that. Secondly, I want to, and the training emphasizes this, that even though we do this without pay, whether you're on the CRC or whether you're on the planning board or any other board, you are a town employee. And as such, you represent the town. And so that means whenever you're communicating by email or talking to a neighbor or anything else, you represent the town of Westport. So please keep in mind that you are seen by people as a representative of the town of Westport. And so Stephen Forrest does a great job at the beginning of town meetings about how we should communicate with one another, how we should treat one another, whether it's other people in these meetings, whether it's staff. Amy and Michael, these are not, Amy and Michael are not staff to the CRC, they are staff to the town and to the planning board. We should always be treating people with respect and keeping in mind that everyone's got First Amendment rights and all that, but we are always representatives of the town of Westport. So thank you for letting me say that. The last thing is that at the beginning, 3 years ago, when we set this up, we had an election of chair and vice chair. I was elected chair and Sean vice chair. We probably should have done that every year, but it's certainly time to do it again, as we've all been up for reappointment. And I'm happy to serve again, but I'm also happy if someone else wants to be chair. But I do think we should have elections again. I shouldn't just continue to serve, ad nauseum. And so I would ask right now for nominations for the positions of both chair and vice chair. Jim Whiten.
You're on mute, Jim.
I will nominate John Bullard as chair and Shauna Tees as vice chair.
This is Bob Daler. I second that.
Thank you. I'll never forgive either one of you. I have long memories. Are there other nominations? I don't see any hands up. I don't hear anything. And I think I've got my sound, so it's working. In that case, all in favor of those nominations, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we will.
John, I think with remote meetings like this, to be compliant with open meeting law, you have to have a roll call.
All right.
Amy, could you
Yeah,
administer that?
Amy, you want to go down it?
Sure. I'm gonna just call on the people who have been re-sworn in and reappointed. So Phil Weinberg,
Phil Weinberg, aye.
Michael Yogman,
Aye.
John Bullard,
Aye.
Jeff Canton,
Aye.
Wendy Nicholas,
Aye.
Jim Whiten,
Aye.
Sean Leach. We'll come back to him. Bob Daler.
Aye.
Okay, we just need Sean Leach to participate.
Sean's on mute. Sean, are you there? Sean, are you there? Well, he's here, but he's on mute.
Yeah.
He might be.
He's probably multitasking.
Yes.
I'm sure he's driving, so.
Yeah. All right. Well, we've got a quorum and so that's a vote.
Yep.
Okay.
I'm assuming Sean was in the affirmative.
Well, just say he's not voting. He didn't vote one way or another. So you don't need him to be a vote. He's just present.
No, I think I do need him to be a vote, to be a quorum, because we need 8 people and he's the 8th person.
Well, he's in attendance.
He's
So-
voting present.
Okay. All right. Then that passed.
All right. So
John, one other reminder, I think that the town clerk needs us all to send in our conflict of interest forms, if my memory serves me right, along with the ethics training.
yeah, once you do the that conflict of interest training, which that takes about an hour, then the acknowledgement takes about 2 minutes to do. And it automatically, once you do that, the clerk automatically gets it. So you can do it all, at home, or as I see Phil Weinberg and Jim Whiten, you can do it out on your porch. All you need is a computer and you can do it. And it automatically goes to the clerk, so you don't have to physically take anything to the clerk.
But
Okay,
there were 2 different things, John. There's the conflict of interest and the open meeting law.
Right.
In the conflict of interest, is the one you do on the computer. The open meeting law is about a 20-something page thing that you have to read through and then sign that you read it and understand it.
yeah, you
And
have
there's
to check a box saying you've read it and understand it.
No, but it's not online. It's a piece of paper.
And it gets submitted to the town clerk.
Right. It's
Yeah, but
different.
I think
It's
you
two
can
different
get that on, you can get that online through mass.gov. And the documents there, you go through it and you check a box and say, I've got it, I read it, I understand it.
Okay.
That's what I did anyway. All right, so back to the agenda. Thank you very much for this other housekeeping. The restrooms are down the hall. Oh, wait a minute. You're already in your homes. You know where the restrooms are. Okay. Grant updates. Amy, you got 2 grants here what you want to talk to us about.
Yes, Michael provided me with an update for you. So the first one is the Coastal Resilience Grant. We're requesting $180,000 from Coastal Zone Management to develop a beach management plan for East Beach, Atlantic Avenue, and Beach Avenue. The funds will be used for existing conditions analysis, public engagement and education, shoreline change analysis, and best practice recommendations to build support for adaptation and retrofit and relocation of infrastructure as needed, and implement shoreline restoration projects that support coastal resilience. Secondly, there is the National Coastal Resilience Fund. The Planning Office coordinated a regional application through the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation with Little Compton and Dartmouth to request $281,000 to enhance coastal and climate resilience of sensitive habitats, at-risk species, and critical infrastructure. Within Westport, our focus will be areas of the town that do not already have plans in place to scope out potential projects to improve coastal resilience. And this includes areas like the head of Westport, salt marshes, including the Salt Marsh Flats, overhead utilities in places like East Beach and Horseneck Beach and the Westport River crossing, and also improving the resilience of Hicks Bridge.
Any questions of Amy?
Good luck.
Thank you.
And Amy, let us know if any of us could help out. I have one other grant item. David Cole had alerted us to a grant opportunity, a small one with the Mass ECAN. That's the Ecosystem Climate Adaptation Network. They were offering opportunity for funding of $2,000 to support committees like us. We did do a quick turnaround application just online, and unfortunately we were not selected, but I just wanted on record that we did apply for that.
Thank you, Jeff. You don't ask, you don't get.
Jeff, could you mention the meetings we're doing with Serpent about the community engagement? That hopefully is going to lead to $50,000 in funding, correct?
Yeah, it does. Maybe that's something Michael would want to cover since he's kind of chairing that group at our next meeting. But yeah, we do have a grant through MVP 2.0, as many of you know, that is focused on vulnerable population engagement in climate resilience. And that group has been meeting with support from SERPED. And once we get to, I think, the third stage, there is a no-tie grant. We can use it for whatever kind of resilience or engagement activity we decide, or the committee decides at the end of that project. And I believe it is in the range of $50,000, Mike.
Okay. All right. Now, the fifth item on the agenda, we're down to the last two subcommittees in terms of first draft of reports. And so Wendy Nicholas has been working on the historic structures report. Amy has, I believe, sent out these reports to every member of the CRC at least a day or two ago. So you haven't had a lot of time to read them, but you do have them in your email. So I don't want Bob or Wendy to read them or go through them kind of word for word. I want them each to take, 10 minutes to kind of go through what they're trying to do with them and summarize them so that we can get some Q&A and some reaction to them. And so, and then spend the rest of the meeting, now that we have rough first drafts of all the reports, with how do we take, they're all very different. And under Jeff's leadership, then see how we turn these into a first draft of a CRC report. So Wendy, you want to summarize historic structures for us?
Sure. Thank you, John. And I'm apologize for not being able to be on camera, but I know many of you, not all of you, and happy to meet the rest of you. So my entire career, and I'm retired, so it's a long one. My entire career has been in historic preservation, most recently as the Northeast Regional Director of the National Trust for Historic Preservation, which is the national nonprofit for historic preservation. And architect Kit Wise and I approached John after we saw, what that the Climate Resilience Committee had been established, and saw the list of subcommittees. And we asked John if we could have coffee and proposed that the given Westport's historic nature, and the number of historic properties, older and historic properties that we have, didn't it make sense to have a subcommittee on historic structures? Because when you think about it, in Westport and in most coastal communities, the oldest houses, the oldest buildings are close to water sources. They needed water for transportation, for their livelihood, for food, to power factories and mills and so on. And that's all very good, but now a lot of those properties are pretty vulnerable to rising tides, sea level rise, dramatic storms, and so on. So at any rate, not to drag this out, but it ended up, people suggested that I was having a hard time sort of putting together a subcommittee, and I think John and Mike Sullivan suggested to me that I probably could write the plan. So that's what I've done, and one of the things I think many of us love about Westport is its historic nature, that we retain so many buildings from Westport's past, the boat and ship building, whaling, fishing, rum running, agriculture and manufacturing, and then the whole, all of the summer houses that were built in the late 1800s and into the current time. And we have many of those buildings still in place. Michael, I think Michael or Amy circulated a map. There is a FEMA National Flood Hazard map showing the point, and you can see that part of the point, particularly closest to the point, is quite vulnerable to flooding. And Michael is going to do some more mapping for this part of the report, but as he and I looked at the coastal zone management maps and then the FEMA maps and so on, there are other parts of Westport that are vulnerable as well. I think parts of Coxet, Boathouse Row, some properties up at the head, including the building where the Westport River Watershed Alliance and the Osprey Sea Kayak folks are, and there are other places. So Michael's going to do the mapping to insert, Jeff, I hope, into the plan or links to the maps or so on. And from that mapping, we will have a definitive list of specific vulnerable properties. Or so Michael tells me that we can do that. And so then I did a lot of work online, mostly looking at materials available from FEMA. They've got a fantastic document on integrating historic properties and cultural resources in your hazard mitigation planning. FEMA, the National Trust for Historic Property Preservation, the National Park Service, and then there is a national set of conferences initiated by the Newport Restoration Foundation called Keeping History Above Water, and coastal communities on both coasts and Puerto Rico also have sponsored these conferences, and many of the materials are online on the Keeping History Above Water site. And so I spent a lot of time looking at those materials from Annapolis, Charleston, Portsmouth, New Hampshire, Portland, Maine, and some others, and was able, so basically I've cribbed stuff from all these folks who have done a lot of research and planning around the topic of resiliency for historic properties in coastal communities. And I've reviewed the draft with Garrett Stuck, who's the chairman of Westport's Historical Commission. You guys all know what their job is? I think so. I hope so. Anyway, and and then with Betty Slade, and both of them live on the Westport Point and had good information to share with me about the experiences they're having there. And then Burris was also very helpful. So I followed the format that Michael had sent out as recommended format for the report, where there are specific goals laid out and then specific actions. And you can read them all. I hope it was pretty clear as I read it again, getting ready for this meeting. I will move a few things around before you get busy, Jeff. But essentially, we need to start by making sure we have a good up-to-date inventory of Westport's historic properties and cultural resources. And Betty Slade did the inventory that's available on the Mass Historical Commission's website. She says 50 years ago. It's hard for me to believe. There are 900 properties on that inventory. And there are probably others that are missing from the list, and there are some on the list that are no longer with us. So that should be updated. Then the next goal would be, our goal would be to protect vulnerable historic properties and cultural resources from the impacts of future flood and wind events, while still being able to maintain the historic integrity of those properties. And a number of the communities that I looked at spent time evaluating all their at-risk historic properties, giving some priority, deciding which ones were of priority that they really should all rally around and make sure were protected in whatever way was required. And we might do that. I also learned that some of the neighborhoods, particularly the Point, and I'm sure over in Nacoxet, are affected by their septic and septic systems and wells are affected by saltwater infiltration, and that's really a problem for the future viability of these older neighborhoods. Well, of any neighborhood where that's a problem. So if there's some way to help those neighborhoods with shared system or dealing with it in some way. And then to encourage owners of vulnerable properties to take action to protect their properties. And I think that, Sean, if I can just finish and then happy to have Q&A. I think Don wanted to do that at the end. But I think we all need to become knowledgeable about, what are the best practices for protecting properties that are vulnerable. And I did a bunch of reading on this and put a list together of some of the strategies that are used to essentially protect properties. Number one, move the utilities out of the basement. And then, sort of as a last resort, to consider moving the building to higher ground or elevating buildings above the projected high water mark. And since Newport pioneered that Keeping History Above Water conference work, their historical commission has in fact modified its guidelines, the guidelines it uses for reviewing and approving applications. And if you've been to the Point neighborhood, which is really vulnerable to flooding, and that's Newport's oldest neighborhood, if you've been there, you will see properties that are up on new foundations. They're like 3 feet high. I did see one that looked like it was 7 feet high. I guess those folks are planning to be around in 100 years. And then some other things to protect properties from high winds. Then I think lastly, or almost lastly, we need to make sure that our town's regulations allow for appropriate and timely or speedy protection of damaged properties. And it's really important that the historical commission and the building inspector and so on are able to review and approve work to be done post natural disaster, so that buildings don't sort of stand open and vulnerable much longer than they need to be after they've been damaged by storm or sea level rise and so on. And I talked to Garrett about that. I mean, special emergency meetings of the Westport Historical Commission, some kind of fast track review and approval prior to prioritizing reviews for renovations to existing building before devoting time to new construction. And then also having a building inspector, a building code enforcement person who is very knowledgeable, and this is a sort of an engineering question, but in some communities that have experienced hurricanes or flooding and so on, the town officials have been quick to declare properties as must be to be demolished, and we need to make sure that we have really good, solid, experienced people making those judgments. Should that be necessary? Should we have a big storm? And I think. Oh, and then. I heard that the town now has created a hazard mitigation planning committee, and it would be good to have somebody who's keeping an eye out for the state of Westport's historic properties to be involved in that planning work. Lastly, and Jeff, maybe this is not climate resilience, but maybe it is that we all need to do what we can do to reduce emissions and help reduce the threat to our climate. And historic preservation folks have for decades been pointing out that preserving and reusing or continuing to use existing buildings is really the greenest form of development. When you think about it, if you extend the life of the materials and the energy invested in mining those materials or manufacturing those materials, if you extend their useful life, then rather than demolishing, throwing out, and starting all over again, you are putting a damper on or reducing the amount of emissions that you're sending off into the ether. So I would recommend that the community adopt as sort of a fundamental value that we try to preserve and reuse, recycle as many of our existing buildings as we can before we replace them with new buildings. And then I think, Jeff, I also put in a note about Charleston, South Carolina's really cool climate action plan, but that is about carbon reduction. And Jeff straightened me out and reminded me that this is about resilience, not so much about carbon reduction. So maybe that's for another conversation. And I think, Sean, you had raised your hand. I don't know, John, do you want to manage the Q&A?
We've got 3 questions, Sean, then Jim, then Jeff. But I do want to say, first of all, Wendy, thank you so much. There's a lot in your report, and on the theme of reduce, reuse, and recycle. We all want to do that. And for example, you mentioned the issue of saltwater intrusion in wells. One of the jobs that Jeff Canton has is to reduce, reuse, and recycle. So the issue of saltwater intrusion appears in 2 or 3 subcommittees.
Yes.
And one of Jeff's jobs is to say, well, we're going to reduce, reuse, and recycle. That probably should only appear once in the report. And the question is, where does it appear? But it should only appear once. And so that's one example of reduce, reuse, and recycle. Another is that you have correctly identified that we're not the first to see that old buildings are built near the water. And we should think about what that means. Newport, Strawberry Bank, other places have done that. Can we copy good ideas? Joseph Inglesby looked at what Cornell had done and said, hey, they have some good ideas. Can we copy? We're very much into shameless copying of other people's great ideas. So that's recycling. So we're wonderful recyclers of other people's great ideas. That saves energy, which is what we're about. So at any rate, Sean, you've got your first one with your hand up. Questions or comments?
Okay, first thing is I voted aye on that for the nominations that I was trying to get through, but cell service prevented me from.
Oh.
So, but I want to thank Wendy too, because I was no help to her on this, and I should have been. And I want to point out a couple of things. One is in my new life now down in Middletown, we deal with a lot of those historic preservation houses down on Easton's Point and everything. And I highly recommend that the town look at what the city of Newport has done to encourage and or help people maintain and reconstruct those houses in a manner that is resilient as much as they can be, and in a way that doesn't make it overburdening regulatory historical wise, because I think that's one of the problems. A lot of towns fall into a trap about, you got to use cut nails and things along that line, and where appropriate. Second thing is when it comes to structures, I'm a big fan of houses and everything, but I'm also a big fan of the historic structures. As everyone knows, I'm a stone wall guy, and I viewed stone walls in Westport as Westport Stonehenge. But there are Viking ruins, there are Indian burial grounds sited along the river, and other historic, very historic, I'll go, and more ancient probably, in the town that are also on these properties, some of which most owners don't want people to know where they are and what is on the property, but also need to be considered. I mean, it's more than just a structure. It's hard to move an Indian burial ground, and it's hard to move a dolmen, or it's hard to move a Viking trading stone from one place to another without significantly impacting the historic value of that particular item, wherever it may be. So I think that also has to be considered, because old structures, obviously, everything was, because of Westport's nature, everything was located on the water or near the water, and they're all in flood zones. And I think it's important that, it's hard to say catalog them, because they're purposely not known publicly, because for obvious reasons, people tend to ruin these sites, so to speak, but they should be, most landowners know that they're on their land, but it should be something that somehow we can preserve, document, or do something. I'm not sure the best way to do that, but I think it's an important part of the quote unquote historic structure.
Sean, that's really an important piece. And I saw that other communities had addressed archaeological sites, and I didn't spend time on that, but that's a good point. And I think the Massachusetts Historical Commission probably has a pretty good survey, which they don't make public, but a survey of important archaeological sites in Westport. And one thing, and those of you who live on the point may already know this, but one thing that Garrett Stuck was telling me is that a number of the properties on the point have these stone walls sort of back between the house and the water. And he's concerned that they seem to be keeping the water from leaving the property once there's a flood, which I thought was quite curious. But and I think look at what Newport does to help people is, is a little, I've got some of that in there. I think for this town, the question is who's going to do it. I understand that the historical commission is really stretched. And so I think one of the challenges will be, where's the man, where are the people who are going to do the work?
I think it's, and excuse me, and I didn't mean to interrupt, but I think obviously the historic commission is in charge of the historic district, basically Westport Point.
Right.
But that does not cover maybe, I'd say, 3/4 of the historic structures that are in the town. Albeit a Coated, Adamsville, head of Westport, where have you. And that's where some of the problems are. I think it's more of a, I think it's a good idea, as Mr. Bullitt has pointed out, that we copy ideas and apply them, in a manner that fits Westport the best we how, because it is very difficult for people to maintain historic properties in a historic manner without changing the property. I mean, they have to make it viable for them to work, and there's not a lot of regulatory abilities to maintain some of these things. And we've had this discussion. I think Wendy, you gave that very nice charrette down for the Historical Society down at Pooh White's house, but you could see that that everybody's idea of what and how to do it are different, but there should be some kind of a task or some kind of educational in both the town's eyes and the regulatory town's eyes to look at these things under a different set of glasses, so to speak.
Yeah.
Because not everything fits. I mean, the state of Massachusetts very nicely gives a lot of exemptions to major changes required for flood zones, for instance, for historic structures, for building codes and along that line. But it doesn't make it convenient for some people to do that, because if you buy $1 million house at Westport Point, you want to jack it up so you have the $1 million house 5 years from now. And that's understandable. It's just a matter of what's the best way to do it. I think, it takes a lot of dressing. Newport, from what I've seen, we do a lot of them, has done a very good job of getting together with the Historical Society to try to promote, instead of having a, 5-foot concrete foundation, well, let's see if we can get funding to put a stone face on it, so at least it looks right.
Right.
That kind of stuff. And then it looks like it's still been there for 200 years.
Yeah.
And I think those are the kind of things that need to be done here as part of, I don't know if obviously not this committee, but the town's actions and the ability to do certain things for people and to work with them, not against them.
Yeah, and I wrote it, but I didn't mention it. Betty Slade, who chairs the Community Preservation Committee, suggested that there might be a role for the community CPA money to be used to make some of these things happen. And historic preservation is one of the three, areas that can be funded by the CPA money. So, okay. Do you want to go on to Jim?
Well,
Whiten?
let me just say to Sean, when Kit and Wendy came to me at the beginning, they suggested a historic building committee. And I said, why don't we broaden it to historic structures for the reason you mentioned, Sean. And as you nicely admitted, you haven't contributed yet to this report, but it's not too late, Sean. It's not too late. And what we're trying to do here is, I think the most terrifying thing, as I've said, is a blank piece of paper. That is why getting these first drafts is so important, because that's the toughest draft to get. Once you have a first draft, everyone has something to react to add to, and it gets better and better. But the first draft is absolutely the hardest. Now, Sean, you have in your comments in the last 5 minutes shown the subtlety of this issue of structures and how if you map and identify, that can be the first step towards destruction. And so this issue of not buildings necessarily, but structures that might be 10,000 years old, but might, for the same reason that they were built near water. Native Americans were located near the water for the same reason historic buildings were located. But you don't necessarily want to map them because then people start to do souvenir hunting. So I don't want to solve this problem here, but I'm saying you can get into this draft with Wendy, and the same way Wendy said, raise the utilities in the basement, get flow through hatches in the basement the way they did in Newport, so buildings can continue to be used, they can continue to be historic, but we can deal with threats, whatever they are. You can add to that, Sean. You've got a lot to offer from your experience and knowledge. Let me go to Jim White. Jim.
Yeah, I have some edits to the buildings that are listed in your report, Wendy, but I don't think we need to go into it here. But there are some things that need to be changed and structures needed to be added, like the life-saving station on East Beach Road.
Yeah, and Jim, just know that that all that stuff will get sorted out once Michael's been able to do the mapping and we
Yep.
can see specifically the addresses. So I recognize that those lists they're incomplete, and I hope, and maybe they have things on them that shouldn't even be on them. But yeah, good point.
So, and secondly, I am on the Hazard Mitigation Committee. They've met once without me because I couldn't make it, but it is going to be important for Westport because without it, there's a lot of grant opportunities that we cannot get. So it'd be good to try to sort out the historic structures in this issue. The other thing that you mentioned about saltwater intrusion into water systems and stuff, we funded through ARPA funds to help the Coxet water system find a new source of water, partially because of saltwater intrusion and partially because of surface water impingement from Cocky's Pond into the system that covers 51 houses in the Coxet area. And it has resulted in finding a location for this, or an interim location for this water system. The water system has been made this past week, the wells, and I think we could use this as a model for some of the areas that we're going to have problems with, especially the former summer colonies up and down the East River, the East Branch of the river. But I don't think it would be in this section of the CRC that we need to address it. It's probably in the infrastructure.
Right. And I wrote to Bob but I didn't want to lose that piece of information, so but it doesn't go in this section. You're right.
Oh, okay.
It's worked. So I think, that's what we did. So.
Well, Jim, if you would get those edits to Wendy, that would be great. Thanks for going through it. Jeff Canton.
Thanks, John. I'll try and be quick. I just want to thank Wendy so much because we're very appreciative to have somebody with her background and knowledge on this topic participating in our committee. I took a quick look at the draft and I was really really admired the process you went through, Wendy, and the examples that you brought in from other locations that have been going through a similar process. It's always important to be able to borrow from the best and why reinvent the wheel, right? My main question had to do going in before I'd seen the report is what is the scope of this? Is there a defined list of properties that we are considering in here? And it sounds like you're working with Michael to develop that. I was surprised to hear that Westport has a list of historic properties that hasn't been updated in 50 years, though. And then on the cultural resources, are there cultural resources that have been identified that we should be including in here? I know
That,
Sean brought up, there are a number of probable sites on private land, and maybe there's advice we can give to those type of landowners that could help them go through their own process of preserving those sites without having to involve the town. But are there other cultural landmarks that you've identified?
That's a good question, Jeff. What I had in my mind when I was writing that, and there's not much in the report on this, but were collections of documents like the town's archives or the town's files, and what happens if those are not in a safe, waterproof, fireproof place. But the other thing that came to my mind was, and I don't know the people who live on the point, but at any rate, the other thing that came to my mind is, are there people in town who have valuable collections? Whether it's something that the Historical Society, the Westport Historical Society, would be interested in, whether it's diaries or letters or paper stuff and photographs, and are they in places that are vulnerable to flooding or fire, and so I actually didn't write much except about the town's archives on this, but it could use some fleshing out.
Wendy, I hate to interrupt, but I think that the town clerk or the town clerk's office has been in the process of digitizing most of the old documents that they have. And I think they might have already done about 80% of them.
That's great. That's great. Check that box.
I'll interrupt here, but also, and if you're not aware, the Historical Society has a number of historical documents. We've just spent a tremendous amount of money on the Bell Schoolhouse, which unfortunately is right up at the head of Westport. And there are a lot of historical artifacts and collections that are there or are going to be stored there. So it's something to think about also.
Yep.
As part of
Yeah.
Before going to Jeff, I haven't been to read. Kyle Johnson has extensively entering the chat, as far as I can tell, enough resources that we might take advantage of. So Jeff and Amy, you might want to look through chat at what Kyle has been entering in for resources that we might want to explore as we go forward. But let me turn now to Joseph. You've been patiently waiting, Joseph.
I was going to say that the past is a precedent for the future. And if you look at the past and what's being done in the present, I'd reference the Westport Historical Society's exhibitions on hurricanes. Two had taken place to my knowledge, one at their headquarters and the other at the public library, because those images, I think, in combination with your research, would certainly be of interest to the public, and certainly those people who may poo-ha what the committee is proposing would actually put it in in a very tangible terms of what has happened in the past and what could happen in the future. So I'd recommend sort of incorporating some of the research from the Historical Society and other sources to show what happened in September of 1938 or August of let's see, of 1954 and 1991 and so on, 2012, to show that it is possible again, and what we're finding with the increased ocean warming and other issues, that when it hits, it's going to hit as powerful as it's hit in the past, if not. So it's something to really put on the agenda and to bring to the public's attention in a way that can't be ignored.
It's a good idea, Joseph.
Thank you, Joseph. What any other hands up? So what I'd like to do now is Jeff mentioned we are fortunate to have in one of the foremost experts in the United States of America in historic preservation. Not here living in Westport, but willing to contribute her knowledge in this area. And as we're on to the next topic of infrastructure and safety, we find, again, have one of the best experts in the United States of America living here in Westport and willing to commit his time to help us solve problems in structure and public safety. And it just out how lucky we are in Westport to have the human resource we have here, and how lucky we are that these incredibly talented and experienced people are willing, instead of just playing golf, to give their time to the town of Westport. Bob Daler has written an outline of infrastructure and public safety, which I've read, and I can't remember whether it's 8 or 9 chapters, but in the outline, a very big topic, and it includes in a hazard mitigation plan, which is just a huge undertaking by itself. And then Bob has tackled the kind of first chapter of that. And he's done it while managing a committee of what, 20 people, Bob? Oh, no, wait. It's a committee of 1. And so, thank you, Bob. And you want to do the Wendy, 10 minutes to walk us through this. Again, all had a chance to, or have a chance to look at it, not just what he's written. Bob is an artist, and the diagrams that Bob has done can be cut, framed, and put up your wall, and they will be valuable at some point. I encourage you those too. Bob, what's yours?
Thank you, John. And as they teach you in business school, the toughest group of people to manage is yourself. And so being a committee of 1 is a difficult task. When I wrote the outline some time ago, and also I delivered the original artwork, and I apologize to the committee of my limited skills with computer systems and computer graphic systems. So the Amy and Michael have the original drawings, and they were meant to be integrated. When we do the final report, they will be integrated into the sections when they are referred to. And whether this is done in InDesign or something, I'm still working, and so in my professional life, I have people who take my scribblings and actually make them into something. But not only did I do an outline, I did a synopsis of all the chapters, and as I went to sort of tackle what these are, there's a lot of frustration, and I found myself sort of listing there's a list of potential risks, and we don't know much about them, and and then I put a period after that, and that's what the chapters might end up saying. But I'll illustrate too with the roadway network and with the dams. But let's talk about water. As you know, except for a very small portion of the town in Northwestport, everyone has wells here, and those wells get water out of the ground. And so I hear all kinds of stories about hydrology in which, there's a river flowing down from Vermont, and we have this beautiful water that we get. That's not so. Essentially, the water that we're drinking is the water that falls on the ground close to us. And basically, two things happen when it rains. Some of the water goes back up into the atmosphere, and some of the water runs off the land, and some of the water goes into the ground. And it goes into the ground in two fashions. One is it sort of replaces soil moisture. It's the things that make your plants grow. So in this shallow infiltration, it is creating the root zone and creating the vegetated life that sits on top of the soil. That's not what we drink. We drink the fraction that gets through all that and enters into the ground. And we have, but this is a fascinating place to live if you like geology and glaciation, because you can see from where we stand here, you can see the great results of the last ice age, and our where we live. The land that we have largely is new, some of it very new. John, where you live, it's probably certainly not more than 5,000 years old, and some of it is a week old. That is, the beach looks different this week than it did last week. But when the glaciers advanced over us, it did two things. In its advance, it laid down essentially all of the stuff that it grinds up. So in the glaciers advance, and we believe here that it was at least several hundred feet thick, and it advanced over a period of 2 or 2.5 million years. It got to us maybe 80,000 years ago, and out in front of it, it pushed up what is called a terminal moraine. So this glacier is advancing over the bedrock geology. is laying things, it's melting as it slides along, it is compressing the soil, and it's pushing up a bunch of stuff in front of it, the stuff that it grinds up as it moves. In the center of this, somewhere in southern Canada, this ice sheet is 2,000 feet thick. So this is something big. So 80,000 years ago, it gets one of its warming periods, and it pushes up the North Fork of Long Island. It pushes up the hills in southern Rhode Island. It pushes up the Elizabeth Islands. It runs out over the Falmouth Hills, Shoot Flying Hill if you go on the Cape. You know, the bulldozer pauses and it melts, and it leaves that line, and it leaves also out in what is now the ocean. It leaves a big terminal moraine, and then it advances over us, and it deposits as it melts all the boulders, all that stuff. And then about 40 or 45,000 years ago, it got cold again. And then the glacier advanced from its retreat and rode back over all the stuff that it melted on top of us. And then it proceeded to advance out into what we now think of as the ocean. And it pushed up the Gay Head Cliffs. It now pushed up the South Fork of Long Island, the Shoremont Hills on Block Island, runs across the northern end of the Vineyard and Chilmark Hills, pushed up the north coast of Nantucket, turned north, and ran up over the highlands on the Cape, and eventually it ran out in the ocean and ended up in Sable Island. So we had this big glacier, and about 20,000 years ago, it got as far as it got, and then it retreated. So there are two of us. There are two kinds of folks here that have wells. One of us, like my well, sits in all the debris that was left from the glacier. It sits in soil that is all compacted by having several hundred feet of ice over it. It sits in these cobble, bony, silty soils that were left. And my well and almost all the wells here, that overburden on the bedrock is, in some cases, it's nothing. That is, the bedrock sticks up on the land, but in most cases, it's 15 to 25, 50 feet very deep well. So you have this compacted soil material that the glacier left sitting over the bedrock, and most of the wells are in the bedrock. There's another bunch of folks that live in the outwash. As the glacier melted, it sorted materials and it left materials and it left a mound. And the river that you see, the rivers that we see now, ran out through what is the Barrier Beach. And the Barrier Beach all was deposited, after the oceans came back. So at the height of this glaciation 20,000 years ago, the ocean level was about 400 feet lower than it is now. All the water on the planet was tied up in the two glaciers on either poles, and the water came back and left the shore that we see now. So in a series of figures, I went and said, what do wells look like when they're at the coastal edge? So if there's a theoretical relationship between the water called the Geibel-Hetzberg relationship that says for every foot that water is above mean sea level in the ground, that it extends, fresh water extends 40 feet below the mean sea level. That's theoretical based on the relative densities of ocean water and fresh water. The reality is it's much more like 20 times because we don't really have deep ocean water. We have saline water. We're in an estuary. We have freshwater rivers that are emptying into the ocean here. But essentially at the coastal edge, the fresh water is floating on the salt water. And I showed that in my figure 2. And in figure 3, I show a well that is in that condition. So when you pump a well, two things happen. If you can think about the water is now everywhere flowing into the sea level from levels of higher elevation. So it's flowing slowly and in most cases gently to the ocean. And then we stick a well in it and we pump at much faster rates than the water is seeping. Does that make sense? So we turn on the pump and we pump a lot of water out. And how does the water get out and into our faucets? It draws down the level, and so when the pump kicks on, the water all flows into the pump rather than flowing into the river or into the ocean. And it does that over a little cone of influence, depending on how big your pump is. When it does that, it reduces the level that the water is above the salt water. And what the salt water does about that, since it's heavier, it knows that the fresh water is no longer above that, and it does the reverse thing. It bounds up under your well. So if you look at figures 3 and figures 4, you have this upconing, they call it, of the salt water as you draw water down. So that's why it's critically important to look at what is our pumping rates, how far back from the ocean can we get, and as Jim Whiten explained, we have been able to work with the Coxit folks and move a well which is now sitting immediately adjacent to Cocky's Pond, and move it up into a little better outwash area. And if all of these wells in the rocks are really getting water out of the fractures and it's recharged from above, but it's all the granite here is fractured and we're sucking the water out of these cracks. So for most of us, as long as we don't have a drought and we don't have a lot of development around us all trying to draw out of the same wells, for those of us with rock wells, sea level change, and if we're back from the ocean, sea level change is not going to mean much to us. For those of us that live immediately along the coast, and by the coast I mean all the way up the river, if we're in these glacial outwash deposits or in the Barrier Island system, or living there, the water is a very thin lens, and a lot of the wells and Cherry and Webb and the homes there are little well points, drawing just out of this very thin lens. There's salt water on both sides, and there, those wells are very, very subject to saline intrusion. And it's true in the harbor. It's true along the river. It's true at this can happen for the homes that are the old cottages and everything that are sitting right down near the river, and places like Cadman's Neck, which is sort of as the glacier melted, it sort of deposited a big sand and gravel piece in Cadman's Neck. So in those areas where you have the very permeable non-rock wells, the sea level change is a big risk and will eventually cause many of those immediate wells to become saline, and that's already happening in the harbor. So what I tried to do is to go through that. This is where our water comes from. This is why it's different in some places here and in other places. And also in the coastal edge, particularly in the Barrier Island system, the phreatic surface, the freshwater surface, varies with the tide. If I'll try to draw a word picture, but when the tide is low, the water tends to bend down and go out and meet the level of the ocean. When the tide comes in, it sort of bends up in an area. It bends up the water, and the salt water again intrudes underneath. So you have this fluctuation of the tides, and depending on how high you pump at high tide can affect how much water so much saline water you draw in. So it's very subtle. The big risk is sea level's going to thin that freshwater lens until some places you won't be able to pump from it. I think the biggest risk to our water supply is the losing the power in a storm. That I think all of our wells are electric. When I bought our house, we had a dug well with a hand pump on it. It also had another well, but the original house had a dug well with a hand pump. We have a generator, but not everybody has generators. And we talked about hurricanes. If we get hit by the hurricane, we will definitely lose power. All of our power is hanging on poles. All of our streets are filled with trees. We have a very limited ability to keep the lines clear. So if we get hit with a Category 3 storm or larger, and it's not if, it is when we will get hit. I just as people talked and they go through the list of the 38 hurricane and the 54 hurricane, the Donna and everything, I may be the only person on this call who actually has lived through all of those hurricanes. I actually was at my grandmother's house in New Bedford in the 38 hurricane. Any event that has happened has 100% statistical chance of happening again, because it's in how we forecast the storm. So we're definitely going to get one again. And when we do, we essentially will be without our water supply for some time. And that is probably the single biggest risk. So that's what this is about. We've got wells. We understand how the hydrology works. We understand how in the permeable areas like the Barrier Island system, how the sea level exchanges, the freshwater exchanges with the salt. And we know that the answers to that are not easy, but they lie in, for those people living in the Barrier Islands or those people living in the lower elevations along the harbor or along the river, the answers lie in community well systems. That is, building a system that moves the well back out of the risk of saline intrusion. So that's what the Westport Harbor Water Company is doing right now. They're moving their well up at a higher elevation away from the risk. That's what we could do. In the north end of town, we have a ready at hand solution, except nobody wants to spend any money and build infrastructure. We could extend the Fall River water system and take away the risk completely of a power outage and the loss of water supply for people who live in the north by extending the water system that exists in the street there now. If the town meeting changed its attitude about public infrastructure. I also, along with Amy and Michael, have a synopsis of all the sections, and I sort of gave up trying to tackle them sort of in frustration because I needed to know so much information. And let me just take two. The East Branch and the West Branch. The West Branch, its head is a dam. So Adamsville Road, the Adamsville Pond, the road sits on a dam. Forge Pond and Forge Road and the Forge Pond and right at Route 6, the remaining dams on the East Branch, and they are old. They're not owned by us. They're owned by Fall River. I don't know anything about them except that they exist. I know what they look like. I know their spillways are very old and very small. As I had an opportunity in the early part of my career to restore a dam that failed in the '54 hurricane. And it was an old Mills Dam in Burrillville, Rhode Island, and it washed down through Woonsocket, killing people and washing away mills and everything when it failed. It's 2,000 feet long and 55 feet high, and it had a spillway in it. The spillway was 35 feet wide when it failed. We replaced it and built it and raised the level a bit. The new replacement spillway is 150 feet wide. So you can see these old mills and these old mill ponds were not designed for the 10.7-inch rainfall we're forecasting for 2070. You know, they are, it is very likely, and they're earth-filled dams, they're very likely to be overtopped. And if they're overtopped, they will erode. That would flood down through and put at risk the bridge at the head, and that's a significant risk. Other than saying that, that's essentially what I know about that. In the report, we could take photographs of that. We could do that kind of stuff, but I don't know when the last time they were ever inspected. I don't know if they are inspected. I don't know. I mean, there's a lot that we don't know, and it takes some engineering to sort of do that. The second example is our roadway network. Essentially, all of our long roads, Maine, River Road is not a good. I'm thinking of escape routes and how we get out, and can we have evacuation route from the flood-prone areas? So Main Road, 88, Drift Road, Horseneck Division, all generally rise from Allen's Pond or from the ocean, are rising to the north. So they could provide escape routes to Route 6. They have almost no drainage within them. Most of them have roadside ditches. Jeff, where you and I live, we have roadside ditches that run along, and they cross, and they take the water in those ditches under the road in old stone culverts or old corrugated pipe culverts. So there's this huge inventory, and the question comes, are these really escape? There's a need for a huge inventory. Are these routes really escape routes? Or could they be flooded? Now, some of them, like where Angeline Brook crosses under, the roadways, and where Kirby Brook here on Drift Road, those brooks are substantial enough that they could be a risk of washing out. But most of them are small, and we don't know, how big of a risk. So if you're thinking about, if you look at the experience we've had, we got 16 inches of rainfall in the 54 hurricane. Donna, that came in 55, had 19 inches of rainfall. If you look at Irene, that went up the Hudson River Valley and went up through Vermont, washed out almost every bridge and the White River. You look at every bridge up there, that's almost all of them that have been replaced after that storm. So the question is, if you're driving along and there's just a puddle in the road and it's only 6 inches deep, when you how do you know that you get to some point where it's not just 6 inches deep, but the culvert is actually, the roadway is actually gone underneath that. So those are the kind of risks that I think require an inventory, require a lot of sort of engineering work beyond, certainly beyond me as the committee member, but. And I don't quite know, as a committee, what we should decide to say about that. We should decide to say that these are risks that need attention, and this is a task, a list of tasks that should be tackled, and maybe in the vulnerability report or the hazard mitigation report, or some of these grants that we're getting, or do we try to, I think trying to tackle dam safety is going to be a task.
I think just a quick answer to that, Bob. I would think not every town is doing a resilience report, but we are, and that it's perfectly understandable if one of the recommendations that comes out of this report, to stay on the issue of dams, is that we need information on culverts or bridge openings or dams. The more specificity, the better. But if that report got delivered to, pick a name, I'll pick Mike Rodrigues, with a list of culverts or a list of roadways with these bridges need to be inspected, or these culverts need to be inspected. They're not going to get that from a lot of towns, because not a lot of towns are doing resilience studies. And if we're there first with specific requests, I would bet that relevant state agencies are going to get that list of requests from someone like Senator Rodericks, and those things are going to get done. And who knows what they'll show us, but we'll get the information we need to take the next step.
And Jeff, you know, we live close by, and you know how the report gets put together graphically, so the illustrations and everything work with all of this. You know, looking at the flood hazard areas and the roadways and evacuation routes and all of those kinds of things. It just needs some sort of staff, someone with skills that I don't have, to put together something that is really readable.
Jeff, you have your hand up.
Yeah, just a couple of things on the water section, Bob. There's a lot of great information there, and again, we're very grateful and lucky to have somebody like you participating in this process. As a non-engineer, honestly, I struggled through some of it, but by the end, the takeaways were pretty clear, right? Like most people are on wells, which will be okay with the expected changes from climate variations. A major hurricane with long power outages notwithstanding. But then some people are on these wells that are a different animal. And my question is, do we have any way of identifying those or mapping those in our capabilities, or is that just unknown at this point? How many people or what percentage of the wells might be in that condition?
I think we can have a guess at that. Clearly, everything on the Barrier Island system. So if you take from right on the Dartmouth line, Little Beach, up where around the head end of Allen's Pond. So all of those, all of those homes in there. I mean, a lot of those homes in there. I can't say all of them. Then everybody, East Beach, the West Beach piece that has homes sitting on it. Then all of Cherry and Webb, all of that, Atlantic Avenue, all of those homes that are around the salt ponds. So if you look at Richmond and the salt ponds, the homes that are right low and adjacent to that, and then I would say up both. If we did, for instance, if we took the flood hazard area, we took the FEMA map and showed the flood hazard area up and down both of the East Branches, and the East Branch and the West Branch, we would probably encompass the homes that have wells at risk.
So that's good. And I think it's important for this and all the other impacts that we're looking at, that we let people know, based on where I live, I'm at risk for this, right? Because there's public actions that the town may consider taking, but then there's also private actions that people may need to take or want to take for their own resilience, right? So I think where we can, we need to try and identify where are the particular vulnerable areas, so people can look at it and say, hey, that's an issue for me. And then that helps get their support if we have proposals going forward, right? The other thing, Bob, is, looking at the rest of the report, there's still a lot of work to be done. And I wonder, are there research tasks that would be manageable by people on this committee, or, could we talk to UMass Dartmouth and see if there's any students who are looking for a project that could help us tick off some of these things that we need? Maybe we should be thinking about other grants that we could be pursuing to help us do these kinds of assessments too.
Yeah, if there's work to be done, and no one has ever, when we first divvied up committees no one raised their hand for infrastructure and safety. And, you know, and just, you know, I'm still working. So, you know, I have plenty of excuses, but there's no good reason. We could sit down and flesh out some of these items, but it's going to take some work. It's going to take more work than I can do. That is, I simply don't have the time.
Yeah, that's my,
I want to, you know, it's 6:50. And I want to get to the last, which is really important segment of this meeting, which is how do we combine these reports? But I've got two questions for Bob. Now three. But I do, you know, I don't want to go to 8 o'clock tonight. Okay, guys? And I want to leave some time for Jeff to say, how do we combine these? So these questions for Bob, I want to keep them short. All right, Joseph.
Wanted to thank Bob, who was able to tell the story in such a lucid way that it's understandable for anyone, public. Really brought it all to life. Your storytelling actually allowed me to visualize what you were saying. And I wanted to thank you for your knowledge and depth of understanding and your ability to communicate with the public. And I think that the word here is communication, because as it goes to the next level, to the next stage, it's going to be critically important that we get this out to the public. And you raised the question of Route 6, for example, voted down at town meeting. And you know, what is unfortunate is that it wasn't brought to the attention of the public that Westport has the lowest tax rate in Bristol County, followed by Dartmouth, and then followed by Fairhaven. Both Dartmouth and Fairhaven have a diversification of their tax base. So it's a question of communicating to the public these sorts of, you know, details that would bring this to their attention and also change their mind to vote yes for infrastructure instead of no. So I think your storytelling about the dams and the infrastructure issues and the flooding, I think you've told the story. I think that's going to make the difference for what grant getting and also for public forums. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Joseph. I got Jim Whiten.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, and maybe Amy can tell us how that stands, but I think we have applied for a grant for culvert replacement. And I don't know if it's a current grant or we're just applying for the grant. Amy, do you know?
Amy,
Amy.
so you.
Yep, I'm here. Sorry. So we applied for that grant, and I believe it's for the design
Right.
of the new culverts.
Mhm.
I don't know if it's actually like implementing the design, but I know that the design.
No, but you have to get the design first, but
Yeah.
so it is on our radar. It probably should be higher up on our list, but I think if we get MVP squared away with 2.0, we could get some grants, at least from them or some others from CZM for culvert replacement. And the question is, are these culvert replacements enough to handle, you know, the hurricane, a number 3 or 4 hurricane? But
All
that's
right.
it.
Okay, Phil Weinberg. Did
You
we
gave
lose?
up.
We had Phil there.
It has.
I'm here. Yeah,
Oh, did you have a question, Phil?
I do. Because the Board of Health is looking at our well construction, well permitting regulations now. And I was just wondering about the contamination from surface water flooding into the wells. And, because it would seem that the wells would like survive the force of the storm, but if there was extensive flooding along the two rivers of, saline water, whether that is a threat to the wells if they're, drawing, as you described, down pretty far. And so that's not an issue that needs to get addressed, or whether it is something that people could do, that is, ensure that their wells are sealed from surface water, which I think is that they're supposed to do to prevent contamination of the wells that are in the wellhead.
Yeah, Phil, they should be, the wells should be sealed at the surface so that they're not taking surface runoff and particularly storm, because the water quality goes down during floods, and you don't want that water flowing in there. But in the Barrier Highland system, the homes on Cherry and Webb, they can't protect themselves by sealing the top because the soils are so permeable. They're all post-glacial sand and gravel deposits. The salt water will be in there. They're probably, and I know at some places on the Cape, there were wells that didn't recover from hurricanes, and even though the tide level, the flood level receded, they always had brackish water afterwards. Not really salty, but not really drinkable.
Wow.
Well, just looking at how, what's the right word? How little oversight I think our well regulations require, to ensure that wells are sealed and constructed in that way, makes me think that it is a potential, vulnerability. Anyway, that's my question, and thanks.
Right.
Sorry.
I have no idea. Most people probably don't know anything about their wells other than most of them can tell where they are.
Right.
All right, Mike Yagman.
30 seconds, John. I just wondered, given the amount of background work that each of these committees need, have we reached out to UMass Dartmouth? I mean, there should be a lot of students looking for research projects around climate resilience that perhaps we can enlist to work with each of the committees and provide some staffing.
I have reached out to Michael Goodman there so far, and he said, "Oh yeah, we should get together now. Maybe I should just reach out again. It's summertime, but maybe beginning in September we could get some students focused on this. But I've reached out a couple of times for professors to get involved without success. Michael Goodman to see if we could get some students. So far, I've struck out, but I can try again.
John, if we get some of these grants, we may have some ability to pay kids. And one of the nice things about I'm always stunned by working with recent grads and young engineers. Like the things they can do with the computer systems are magic, and like, oh, I didn't know it did that, and essentially the skill set they bring is really complements my experience in judgment stuff. I like working with young people because they're much more clever than I am.
Well, we accepted David Cole's resignation earlier in the meeting. He suggested a couple of years ago that we might want to do an application to, say, Bay Coast Bank for a $50,000 grant to hire some modest staff for this committee, because we're all just going ahead as volunteers, and it might be good to have some staff. And the committee as a whole said, well, we don't need staff, and it's premature to get staff. And the committee as a whole shot down the idea of applying for private funding. Now, maybe I disagreed with that decision, but maybe that was the right decision back then, and it's not the right decision now. And if because we've got a first draft of a report, got a lot of meat in it. It needs now some work that takes some brain power to put together. The report, you think of the report of the water subcommittee and what it looks like, and the report as it stands of the public safety and infrastructure. These are very different kinds of reports. They're both good, but they are very different. And how do we put these things together into one is going to take some work. And so it may be that this is starting to get beyond what we can do as volunteers. And maybe we could get some students from UMD and keep going on the low budget free route. Or, somebody mentioned that we might get a grant from Serped. I don't know where that stands. But Jeff, I want to get to you. What are your thoughts on how we start to take these rough drafts? Now we have rough drafts, some complete, they're all in different forms, some incomplete. What are your thoughts on this now?
Okay, I'll try and be brief, John, but I've been collecting and looking at climate resilience plans from other jurisdictions. There's not a lot of towns as small as Westport that have actually done this yet. But the ones I've looked at include Concord, New Bedford, Newburyport, and Salem, and Mass, Stonington, Connecticut, and then I've got a few from other parts of the country, Port Angeles, Washington, Rochester, New York, San Diego. Many others have climate action plans, which include greenhouse gas reductions and resilience, but I've been more focused on resilience for the reasons we all want to just focus on resilience. We're not the climate change solution group, we're the climate resilience group. But a lot of these plans have many things in common, right? They take a basic risk assessment approach. So they're going to look at all of the potential impacts from climate change that are known or are understood. They're going to say which of these apply to our community, and they're going to say, okay, we need to prioritize, and we'll take, we'll look at it in terms of risk. So risk can be defined a few different ways, but often it's like, what is the likelihood of this happening? And then if it happens, what are the consequences? So risk is the product of those two things. And I think that is the way to go. And I think we'll need to do some work once we have this inventory of potential impacts and the assets that they're impacting to decide which of these are higher risk than, they're not all high risk. They can't all be high risk. So we'll need to start thinking about that. But if you would like to see an example of a report that I think is something that's doable for us, that is appropriate in scope and size, and that looks really good, take a look at Salem, Mass. Their report is about 50 pages. It was done a while ago, but it starts off with, they had a climate resilience committee. So what's the authority for this? They have a letter from the mayor, and, this is a town committee. What was the process we followed? Who were the participants? What kind of outreach did we do to get input on it? And then they identified the climate change impacts that are relevant to Salem. They did their vulnerability assessment, the risk assessment, and then they started to prioritize. They said, which of these risks do we need to start addressing, and do we have the capacity to start addressing? And the recommended adaptation strategies. And there's some great toolkits available for identifying adaptation strategies. Something called the Climate Resilience Toolkit, which is .gov. So it's a federal resource, fantastic resource for identifying adaptation strategies and possible solutions. And what I've seen in a number of the subcommittee reports so far is that we're already identifying action items to address some of these risks that we've identified specific to Westport. So I think maybe for the next meeting, I'd like to put together just a little walkthrough of one of these plans or a proposed outline, and talk about how our existing reports do or may not yet fall into that outline, and then work with the subcommittee chairs to help work their reports into that format.
Well,
And some of these subcommittee reports as we have now may be more than what we need, and they could be a background report where we extract the essential information into the report that goes to the town and the public.
do you think rather than use Salem's outline and put our report into theirs, that you could use the structure we've developed of, agriculture, water, health, etc., and maintain our structure with, because we've been using our structure for 3 years. And we've been identifying risks within our framework. Now, there is no question there is redundancy. I use the example of saltwater intrusion in wells, and you don't want redundancy. But what you talked about is risks and then actions and so on. We want to have a common way of each chapter laying out whatever the chapters are, so that each one is organized the same way. So we've got to figure that out. But I don't think 3 years in, we want to copy Salem's report.
Well, each of these jurisdictions has a different set of assets that they're concerned about, right? And we've identified our assets. It's agriculture, it's historic, it's infrastructure, it's public safety, it's water. So we've got ours. I'm not suggesting we adopt somebody else's list of assets, but the process by which you present that information and the analysis and get that into a public-facing document or a town-facing document, I think some of these others, there's some commonalities that are probably best practices and recommended practices from resources like the Climate.gov toolkit.
So here's what I would suggest. I would suggest our next meeting, we meet every other month, is September. Do we do second or third Thursday? I can't remember. It would either be the 12th or 19th of September. What is it, second or third? Will someone remind me? Amy, what do we do? You're on,
I'm sorry, can you repeat yourself?
yeah, sure. Do we do the second or third Thursday of the month?
I think it's usually the 3rd.
All right, so that'd be the 19th of September. Is that okay with everyone?
Yes.
All right, so so we're gonna meet the 19th of September. So Jeff, I think what we should do is have the agenda of that meeting be basically your agenda. And if you can lay out, what you think the outline of our report would look like. And now I don't want everyone else, the other subcommittee heads, looking at you, Bob Daler, to think, oh, I got a vacation now. So people, Joseph Inglesby and others, can use that time to continue to think of, okay, is there something I can continue to do on my report? Keep working on it if you want to keep working on it. If there are things you want to, if you've gotten comments, you want to work with those comments, continue to work on it. But Jeff, if you want to take how you think Salem works in terms of how it's organized, and with all of the raw meat that you've gotten from the, 6 reports or whatever we've got now, I did a preface. You said, well, we also need, in addition to the preface, an introduction where you use the common things like assumptions of what are we going to have for sea level rise? What are we going to have for precipitation? So you don't have to have that in every single chapter. So there might be, that kind of thing, table of contents, all that. So that we see what everything from appendix, acknowledgments, all, everything that's in the report that we're going to have. And then kind of the structure in each of those chapters. And then walk us through how that looks like. And then each subcommittee chair can start to see how they're going to have to modify their first draft to fit what your framework is. Because each one of them is probably going to have to be adjusted, right?
Yeah, to some extent, Bob, John, but I think there's also, a lot of the information is going to be there, and I can take that on to take that information and put it into that format. And if there are gaps, I'll work with the subcommittees, say,
oh,
perfect. We need something here.
Okay. So between now and then, if you're working with the subcommittee folks to say, here's how I think yours get put in this framework, that'd be great.
Well, I think we should have some agreement on what format is going to work for us.
Yeah.
So I don't want to put the cart before the horse there.
Well, yeah. So let's use that 2 months so that you're working with the subcommittee chairs. Now, I get this question from Constance all the time. Will the whole committee, have a chance to review this before it goes out to the public? And I always answer that, of course, yes. Of course, yes. So we're still in draft mode among the committee. And I think Shauna said that before the CRC sends it to the select board, he wants us to, and you're, Community Engagement Committee should also have thoughts on this, Jeff. Once we get this second draft done, what you've got is a bunch of first drafts. Once we get a second draft, which is like a complete report done, then do we have a bunch of public meetings? How do we engage the public in it? And so we should think about that too. Think about what that framework is based on Salem or whichever one you like, and then start talking with the various subcommittee chairs about how their chapter starts to morph into that. What needs to be done to do that?
That sounds good, John. And I'll send out a link to the Salem and maybe a few of the other reports too, if people are interested in seeing where other communities have done it.
Does that make sense? Is everyone comfortable with that approach?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Now I've got 3 hands up. Joseph.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to mention that for the agricultural subcommittee, when I was writing, you can write reports in different ways. And for the report, I did a more technical writing. It was more clinical for the report. There was a lot of detail to it. But when I was presenting to the public at the Grange, we changed the format. It became very personal. So we brought in lots of examples from Westport of farmers and fishermen and shell fishermen, and gave specific, examples to highlight some of the points that were made in the more clinical report. So I'm wondering, do you want who is the audience, I guess is the question. Who is this for? Is it for the general public, for Westporters, or is it for the select board, or is it for state agencies for grants? How should it be written?
I think the audience is Westport, right? In a narrow sense, it's the select board, but it's the select board because they represent the people of Westport. So it is a Westport audience. And if I can just underline what Joseph said, when he made at the Grange recommendations on what you could do in a type of farming, he showed a Westport farm that was already doing that. And I found that to be incredibly persuasive because it showed people this is possible. Look, your neighbor's already doing it. And it was a known place. Not that, oh, somebody in California is doing it. No, your neighbor's doing it already. So it was a very good way to communicate a recommendation. Somebody's already doing it. Somebody in Westport's already doing it. So photographs, assuming that we're going to illustrate this report of any recommendation, if we can find, as Joseph did in the ag section, a Westport person already doing something. If we can start when we know we need an illustration of something, if we can find someone in Westport already doing it, I think is very persuasive. Anyway, good point, Joseph. Kim Patello, you've got your hand up, Kim.
I do. Hi, everyone. For those of you that don't know me, I'm the education director at the Westport River Watershed Alliance. And this year, I started a climate education program with 5th graders. And as part of that effort, after they had classes on weather versus climate and a field program that they did activities and planted dune grass, I went back into their classroom and I talked to them about the Climate Resilience Committee. And in prep for that, I met with several of the committee chairs, including Joseph and Phil, and I met with John, and I met with Mike. And I introduced them to some of the issues that adults in their town are currently dealing with. And then the kids were broken up and they had the option of choosing to be on these subcommittees where they had to try to tackle the problems that Westport is facing. And through that process, the kids, they could choose from the water subcommittee and focus on salt marsh issues. They could choose public health and work on extreme heat issues. For agriculture, their challenge was related to native pollinators to support agriculture. And then there was another committee that was focused on public outreach, and they were tasked with figuring out the best ways to reach kids, teens, and adults in the community. And I would love the chance to share some of that information with this group because I think it might inspire some ideas for each of the different committees that you're working on. So I'm wondering what the best way to do that is, if there's time for me to maybe present on the information, or maybe you just want to report. We are having at the end of August in our River Center, we have our open days that are always Thursday, Friday, and Saturday from 10 to 2. Our August session from August 20th through the 22nd, we're focusing on climate impacts and coastal bird species, and it's going to highlight all of the work that the 5th graders did. So that would be another potential place where you can come and learn about what the students in the town are doing, but I'm just looking for your insights on how to move forward with this.
I don't know. Do you want to do that at our next meeting, Kim?
If you feel like you have time for it, I would love to do that. I mean, I could share a report with you first to see if you think it's relevant and worth doing that way. But I know the kids would, I think they would love to hear that the committee is informed and what their ideas were.
Why, if you've got a report, why don't you send it to me and to Amy? You've got, I hope you've got Amy's, I know you have my email. Send it to us and we could put you on the agenda for that September meeting.
Okay, that's great. I don't have it ready yet. I'm compiling the information, but I can get it to you in a couple weeks. For sure.
Okay. Yep. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Yep. Jim White.
Just quickly, just so you
Amy.
know what's happening, the town of Westport has applied for a regional climate risk assessment grant with Little Compton and Dartmouth together. Little Compton and Dartmouth have bought into it. Michael Burris has led the way. And we have had good feedback that we potentially could get this grant. And I would think if we do, it might help us with all of this because we would hire somebody to do this. And it'd be a substantial grant, I think, from EPA. Amy, I don't know if you have an update on what's happening with that, but I think it could be very helpful to this coalescing our end product with what we have and sharing with them what we are doing already. And I think it would help us go forward, and they might be able to point out where we are lacking.
Amy, are you?
Yeah, I'm here. Yep. So I gave an update on that at the beginning of the meeting. I just kind of went over the review that Michael had given me for this meeting, but if you want, I can read it again.
Please.
Sure. The National Coastal Resilience Fund. This is the one that we're coordinating with through the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation for Little Compton and Dartmouth to request $281,000 to enhance the coastal and climate resilience for sensitive habitats, at-risk species, and critical infrastructure. For Westport in particular, we're going to focus on areas of the town that do not already have plans in place to scope out potential projects to improve coastal resilience. This includes areas like the head of Westport, salt marshes, including the Salt Marsh Flats, overhead utilities in places like East Beach and the Horseneck Beach and the Westport River crossing, and improving the resilience of Hicks Bridge.
Okay. All right, I think we have completed our agenda. Next meeting date is September 19th, 5 o'clock. So enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you all very much. This is a big day. We have completed the rough first draft of the entire report. So I hope everyone who's on Zoom would take your hand and pat another person on Zoom on the back for all the good work that we have accomplished so far. All right, more to do, but pat someone on the Zoom on the back. That's a big step forward. Thank you all very much. Yep. We're adjourned.